everyone, I'm Haley and I'm back to answer your questions. The first question comes from Katie, who asked, how big of a problem are invasive species? Great question, Katie, but before we get into it, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who sent in all the amazing questions. I only have time to do 3 today, unfortunately, but if you haven't checked out my other 2 videos, you can check them out after this. Now, to get into the question, let's just go over some definitions so that we're all on the same page. Firstly, a native species is a species which occurs in an area naturally and has evolved to live there over long evolutionary time. An introduced species is a species which does not occur in an area naturally, where they've been introduced to a given location that is outside of their native range. And this largely comes down to humans transporting species to new areas either intentionally, for example as ornamental plants or as pets, or as livestock which then escape or are released into the wild like the feral goats in the Galapagos. Or this can happen unintentionally, such as in ship ballast water, where the zebra mussel is spread, and the zebra mussel is invasive in many countries around the world. And finally, invasive species are introduced species which spread and damage the environment and our economy and our overall well-being. Note that introduced species and invasive species aren't necessarily the same thing. Some introduced species are more or less harmless, but an introduced species becomes invasive when they spread quickly, when they're difficult to control, or generally wreak havoc on natural ecosystems. The problem with invasive species is that they didn't evolve alongside native plants and animals. So while invasive species aren't inherently bad and may be a perfectly natural and suitable part of ecosystems in their own native range, when a species is introduced to new locations, they can throw local ecosystems off balance, since invasive species often have fewer natural predators to keep their population in check, and the indigenous species may not be equipped to defend themselves or to compete with the introduced invading species. Introduced species may also bring new pests and diseases with them that they might be able to cope with, but which native species may not be able to cope with. So this adds an additional layer of harm to native species and ecosystems. Overall, the spread of invasive species is a huge problem around the world and has been highlighted as a leading cause of extinctions and a major threat to biodiversity.